and I mean this in the best way possible, but like the difference there isn't skill set so much as it is confidence again. It's like they
Mhm.
just are willing to say no. It's not that they're 10 times more talented than you. They just say no, which leads to better opportunities. Instead of being stuck in the cycle of shooting crappy stuff you don't want to with no budget and no plan. And so it's like you have to start that upward spiral, but it all comes down to you controlling the conversation.
The end.
The end. We're only 25 minutes over.
I saw that it had an M mount adapter, which is cool.
Yeah. Who did that belong to?
Friend Joe.
Shout out Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Hooking it up for episodes 1 through 3 on the video side. Now we're Chris's quality in the toilet for episodes, whatever's up next.
Yeah, it will be in the toilet until I get a new camera. So you're saying the A7C?
Yeah. A7C, cool little camera. There's so many cameras now. I can't keep track of it all.
It's like Oprah. You get a camera. You get a camera.
Yeah, totally. And then I mean, even in like cinema world, it's like I've never tried any of the Panasonic stuff, but I hear really good things about like the EVA-1 and the VariCam, and then there's like whole new Canon cameras I haven't tried, like C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark T and the C200 and the C700, and then
C700 looks horrible.
It does. I heard they're making another one though, like a new full frame cinema camera.
Yeah, somebody shared the specs with me of that proposed camera, and they said it was going to be like 20 stops of dynamic range.
Oh yeah, I saw Tim Kang or someone posted something about that. But
yeah, that's all I know.
Not much either. It's some I heard something about like some dual gain, high DR, yada yada, sensor tech. It's all above my pay grade. I like sort of try to explain Bayer patterns to people, and that's the edge of my technical knowledge of sensors.
And they then quickly are like, "Oh, we don't care. Just make it look decent."
Exactly. Yeah. This real moral of the story is no one cares. Just make it look better.
Yeah, just make it fuzzy in the background.
Yeah, seriously. I had that conversation with a client this morning where we were trying to shoot this. It was like an ATM interaction sort of thing, basically, and we were like, "Oh, there's like this massive T-Mobile sign on the side of the building that we were like trying to figure out how to frame out." And they're like, "Can't you just make it blurry?" And I was like,
on the 8.
Yeah. So true story though, we ended up going across the street and I put my 100 to 400 on and just like squished everything down so hard. It was really fun actually. Quentin was like, "I've never seen anything like that before," because I never bring anything that long.
That what focal length were you? And what were you shooting? Just like a talking head at like 300 mil?
Oh no, it was part of a like bank commercial, but it was like ATM, like car pulling up, touch, reverse, whatever. It's these new ATMs they have now that have like Skype built in, so you like are dealing with a person on the ATM.
What? That's weird.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like my inner millennial coming out, but I personally feel like it's the least compelling thing ever. Like the last thing I want to do at an ATM is talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But I guess the idea is like it's more like you can go to the bank and do all the stuff you can do inside the bank, except for you don't have to get out. You can like cash checks and whatever else, but it's also like they've had that forever and it's called a drive-up window. So I don't really understand. I don't know.
Real innovation happening in the banking world, man.
Yeah, it really seems like a solution to a problem that no one has, which, I mean, it's worked out during COVID, I guess, but yeah, just sort of
got
weird.
You a gig.
So yeah, it's got me 2 for the same bank. Yeah, but
so be careful what you say.
I know. Hey, I'll tell them I don't get it, but I don't think I'm the target demo either. I think there's other demographics of people who are really into it, and I'm not one of them. I never go to the bank. Period. Like I have all my online banking and phone stuff. The only time I go to the bank is if I have to deposit a check that is over my like mobile deposit limit.
Same. Yep.
So
really cool stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah, the banking intro. I had a question.
So what's on your mind?
How do you deal with and let's say recently, I don't know if there are any examples that come to mind, like negotiation. Someone reaches out to you and says, "Hey Chris, are you available these days? I've got a thing."
oh, you'll get a description. Mainly, I'll just get, hey, you available these dates?
Well,
And
no,
nothing.
that's what I'm saying. Like, we've got a thing. Are you available?
Right.
What's your response to
No,
that?
my point is just a lot of times people are just not even considerate enough to give you a description of what the thing is that they want you
Right.
to do on the dates. So, joke that fell flat. Sorry.
No, I get it.
So again, start it again. So we have a thing on a date.
Yep. That's
And
you get a
then-
text message or an email.
Cool, and that's it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, first, definitely reply to get more information about said thing. I think you will probably bring up this this term often though, but you turned me on to it, even though that's a weird phrase.
So horny for saying no, baby.
Oh god. Exactly. There we go. If you don't say no, your yes won't mean anything. So trying to, I mean, honestly, that's something that you've like influenced me in the past couple months during our like conversations that kind of led up to us starting this again. Just being just more confident, knowing when the numbers don't line up, you don't have to take the job. And especially if it's a job that isn't going to give you really any reward outside of the monetary gain. That's kind of how I approach things. And what about you? I know you have gone through a couple iterations of like how you approach project. I think you have a more in-depth answer too than my answer, because mine's pretty basic.
I don't know. I mean, I'm honestly I was partially curious because I think this conversation that happens in our line of work all the time is something that like I was never taught how to do. You know, you just
Right.
sort of figure it out. And I think there are a lot of different assumptions and things people make. And like when I look back at the first major chunk of years, really up until the last year, of how I've handled that conversation, I almost sort of cringe at it because I feel like I've learned so much.
Yeah.
But so it's always just interesting to hear that. So the place you go though is like, tell me more about your project and what do you have budgeted for DP rates?
Correct. That's kind of where I go first. And I also
And
want to make it clear that
sure.
like my rate doesn't account for gear, because some people still think that, and it's two separate
Right.
things.
Right. You also don't own a ton of gear though. So do people
Not
call you
anymore.
and be like, we need a bunch of gear?
No, not anymore. But some people, depending on their level of expertise and experience, will think that my rate comes with gear. I think that's just kind of the world we live in for a good chunk of projects.
Right. So let's say I say, hey, cool, we're doing a thing, interview, B-roll, small crew. It's a few days out of town, fly in, 1 day shoot, fly out.
And
so
you're just
like
hitting all the key words, aren't you?
3 days total, and we have X number. I don't know. Let's say we have like $2,000 budgeted, and then I feel like the follow up is always like, it's still like, are you available? But so if someone hits you with something like that, like what's the next step of the conversation?
Well, you just hit a whole bunch of like warning words in that description. Fly in, fly out, only like 1 day shoot. Small, probably nimble, right? Nimble crew, maybe. If that's the description that I'm getting back, there's a lot of apprehension about saying yes to the job on my end, at least. Like, to me, what you're asking for is somebody who is flexible, but you're not going to pay them for the multiple hats they're going to wear. So there's
Right.
just like, and it probably won't be run by a competent person.
Yeah.
But I will say, like the reality I think for people is like sometimes you just gotta work to make ends meet.
Because you get called for different stuff than I do.
Right.
Are those the sorts of calls you get, like on some of this stuff you're doing that's more like music videos, or it seems like bigger teams? Like, do they have more information prepared, or are you still getting sort of like, are you available these days? And you're like, what is it and what's the budget? And then like after you're committed, you get that information, or is that more prepared on those jobs?
So I just started doing large music videos like 2018. No, I'll say 2019. So it's really only been like a year and a half to 2 years. And I used everything that I learned about like setting yourself up for success and like communicating with producers over the years, and really tried to have the channels of communication about rates like how I wanted to have them from the beginning. So with that specific line of work, started out being super clear about my rate from the beginning. Um, uh, and not really budging. And also, at least a lot of the music videos, like they do, the bigger ones that I'm on, blessed to be on, they have a good understanding of what DP rates should be, which I'm thankful for, because the producers that I get to work with in Nashville are like super knowledgeable. So there's, if I come up, they say, here are the dates. They usually tell me at least the artist and director. And they quickly after that, like we talk rates, and it's been a really good relationship. And that's just stuff though that I think I've learned to get better at, and just from the beginning talk rates, like just rip the Band-Aid off. But that's just a learning experience over the years of kind of being frustrated that I'm not getting quote unquote, the rate that I deserve. And partially that's just my own fault for not being upfront about that conversation. I'm trying to get better at that. And I think I've only gotten better at it in the past like 2 years.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it's a learning experience, I think. And it's always hard depending on how your personality is built. And also how good you are with, money, with saving. I think you do a great job at it, being pretty upfront, also because you do a really good job at saving and just managing your money. And when you do that and you know that you're kind of set up, then you don't have to take those professional, like shitty jobs.
Right.
So
yeah. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about, we want to do a whole episode just about sort of like money and numbers and all that fun stuff. And I think that'll be cool. But
also,
yeah,
I'm sorry for anybody listening to this. This is like a meandering as fuck conversation.
Hey, I think it's good. Maybe we'll cut some of it out, but I think it's all good. I think people will empathize with this a lot, because like I came into it and definitely was a just like creative person who wanted to make things, was coming from a minimum wage job, and gear seemed expensive. Rates all sounded crazy. Budgets all sounded crazy. Like you just didn't understand anything. And there's sort of this like slow creeping thing that you get exposed to more and more. And, you sort of normalize the things. But I feel like there's this piece of that conversation that's interesting. And I guess what I'm curious is like, when you say you've gotten better at that conversation, like what do you think you were doing poorly before?
So I think one thing what's great about, I guess, the past 10 or so years in the internet world is like a lot of us have hacked our way to where we're at. Like a lot of people haven't gone to film school, haven't done the traditional PA, work up their rankings. They kind of just jumped into their particular field and went at it. The thing that the traditional way of coming up, though, you start learning it, what you're worth, what things are worth, what your position is worth in the grand scheme of things. And so you couldn't really get, the wool thrown over your eyes when somebody comes at you with the rates, because you probably had somebody that was in the industry 30 years, helping you along the way. So what I wasn't doing good is just not understanding the value of what I brought to the table as like an industry-wide thing. Not asking, just being straight with other DPs, like, hey, how much are you trying to make? Because I want to try to hold the line, so to speak, and make sure that we're all valued properly across the board. And I think too, like I wasn't as confident in what I brought to the table, wasn't as open in conversations with other peers. And I guess getting older just helped. Like I could care less now. Let's just have this conversation and let's make sure that like I take care of you, you take care of me in the world of rates, and let's not get pushed around.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, I feel like part of that is, there's a lack of reference points, both on the, like, let's call it the skill side, if that's what we're looking at. That's like, I don't know where I fall in the hierarchy of these positions. And then even within that, I don't know how the money plays out across that thing. Like when I was starting out, I didn't know what a ESPN camera operator gets paid. I don't know what, a Hollywood cinematographer gets paid. So the question of like, what do you want to get paid feels like I have no clue. Like I have no reference points, And I think
Yeah.
that's where for a lot of us starting out, it's like we go, well, what do you what do you want to give me? And then as long as the number isn't crazy, you're like, that sounds better than most other opportunities I've had in my life. So I'll take it. And like something that I look back on is I got so used to saying yes to everything because everything was better than like when I used to work at Marshall's that I got in this sort of bad habit of always deferring, which then
Yeah.
meant that the other person was always in control. And so that's one of the things that I cringe about is like the number of phone calls I've had where someone's like, hey, we'd love for you to do this thing. We've got these days. What's your rate? And I would say like, oh, normally I do like, or here's what I would say, which is I cringe listening to it, but hopefully people connect to this is like normal full rate's like $1,000, but I like to be flexible, or something. And like basically what you might as well say is like bend me over and tell me what you want to pay me because that
Yeah.
$1,000 I just said is irrelevant,
Right.
because then the follow up is like, oh, well, we budgeted 750 or we budgeted $400 or we budgeted whatever it is. And sometimes they're like, oh, that's fine, but whatever way it was like, I never had any control in that conversation. It was always like, you just tell me what you're going to give me and I'll take it.
So in your example that you gave me, what's your response to that? Evan starting out, or maybe 3 years after starting out and then Evan now, like what are the differences?
I think one of the big differences is having a sense of what I want and being comfortable asking for what I want, instead of feeling like I'm obligated to whatever the party on the other side has said. And I think that happens to me. Like I've been doing less freelance DP work for the last year, but even on the production, direct to client, direct to agency side, I think there's a tendency starting out to go, what's your budget? What's your number? And then whatever someone says, you say, okay, cool. And then I'm going to go reverse engineer how to make something off of that. And I feel like I've gotten a lot more confident with saying, this is what we need, whether it's for a project budget, for my own rate, this is what I need pre-pro wise. Whereas I used to always be like, you didn't budget prep days. That's fine. You didn't, budget for my rate. That's fine.
But you don't
like
start out with that on the response email, right?
Right.
Right.
I mean, sometimes I think it depends on the project. So like part of the reason that I'm asking you this is I had a conversation with a DP friend of ours today who was asking me a similar thing because he had gotten reached out to by a production company that said, hey, we've got a job, it's sort of one of these like fly in, fly out. There's $2,000 budgeted for labor and travel and whatever all else. And are you available? And they had dates and he said, I'm not available. And they said, okay, what about these dates? And he was like, okay, maybe let me check. So he was asking me, he was like, I don't know what to do. He's like, it's sort of like enough money that I'm tempted to say yes, but all these other things. And I was like, I told him, I think you should tell them your rate and be willing to walk because they really like working with you. They've already told you that they're working with you because they don't like someone else. And he was like, I feel like I've got to acknowledge what they said in the budget thing. And I wrote a text out for him and I said, just send them this. And it was like, because the producer had said, let's lock those days then after he said that he might be available. And he was like, I don't know the creative. I don't know they just told me a number. And I was like, say, I'd love to lock those days. My rate is $1,500. I do half days for travel for the 2 travel days. And if that all works, then I'd love to lock it in. And he's like, I sent the message and I'm so worried. And literally 5 minutes later, the producer texted back and was like, we can do that. And It was like, he went from getting $2,000 to $3,000 for the same job. And all he did was say what he wanted instead of taking what he was given. And I think that's one of the things that like I look at is I've spent so much of my career just taking what I've given. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And when you're starting out, you don't have any leverage. You don't have enough work. You can say yes to everything. But I think that a lot of us have gone through this tension of like, how do you start having a seat at the table in that conversation, and it's not so one-sided. So that's why I'm sort of curious, where you're at.
Well, it's really, it's, I mean, I think where you're at now, I like to know, like the creative and who's attached to it, especially like director, if a producer's reaching out, just, and I guess vice versa. If a director's reaching out, I want to know the producer, I want to know the AD, just because that gives me a quick gauge on how serious this project is. Like, how serious are they taking it? What are the resources? And then I know that, like, okay, this is something worth my time. But the thing that's hard is, like, you gotta, if you're hacking the system and like really just jumping into the industry, that's your starting point. Like, you then kind of train yourself to take every opportunity, and then growing out of that at what point, because I think you also have to be honest with like your skill set, whether you're going to build like a production company or you're going to try to go to like LA or New York and like do that whole thing and just be a lone wolf. Like, and knowing also the market you're in. So you have like, when do you make the jump professionally, like your market, what you're good at, what you're trying to build, what you're trying to do. It is such a, I guess that was why my answer wasn't very concise on your initial question, is just there's so many different variables. I know you're trying to make it, what would I do? But I guess my mind goes to all the options and different variables that you could have when you're responding to that question.
Right. Well, and that's where it's like, I think that's part of what I'm excited to get
into. Such a hard question
in the money conversation, is like, because in our industry, like, there's people who are getting paid, you know, $200, $300, $400 a day who are really talented. And there's people who are getting paid $30,000 a day. And there's people, you know, there's this whole range, and depending on the kind of work you're doing and your skill set and your industry and whatever else. I've been a big fan. I would definitely recommend to anyone who's interested in this sort of thing, like, go listen to and read everything Blair Enns has ever written or put out there. He has a podcast with a guy called David Baker called Two Bobs. And they have so much really good information on this. But one thing that that he said that like rings in my ears all the time in these conversations is that one of the critical mistakes creative people make is thinking that money is related to competence, and that it's actually far more correlated to confidence. And that the confident person 1,000%. Is the person who gets paid. It's not the competent person. And I think for me, early on in my career, I was so worried about being competent and getting better and better and better and waiting for the money to show up. And then the money doesn't show up and you keep getting taken advantage of and whatever else. And you start to realize like, oh, and then you start seeing other people who you might go like, my work is better than that, and they're getting paid a ton of money, you know, or they're doing really well. They're really busy. Their clients respect them. They have whatever else. And so much of that has more to do with confidence, your perception of yourself, your willingness to perceive opportunity, to say no and walk away from things, changes your reality a lot faster than getting like 5% better at lighting does.
So, question though, I agree, but in a journey, like, how would you recommend that transition happen? Because to me, like, a bunch of confidence at the beginning when you really don't have the skill set, even though I do agree with that statement that you just said, is kind of a fool's errand. Like, you got to get into that confidence over time, I think. Right. So how do you transition?
I think you can always have the confidence, honestly. I think that you can practice having that conversation relatively early on in your career. I think the dollar values just change. Like, you know, I remember
I get what you're saying.
Getting called to do like graphic design projects when I was 16, and people being like, hey, can you make us a poster for $50 or whatever? And I was just like, yeah, sure, whatever. And it's like, if you're working for $50, if you're second shooting weddings for $100, like whatever you may be doing, I think that to practice that skill of saying, this is what I need, or to practice like holding some degree of your own in a negotiation. And there are situations where someone's going to come in and you're going to get a project or a client or whatever else. And the right move may be to just sort of lay down and take whatever's given to you, because that is the most valuable thing. But I think to practice, even at those early levels, how to say, this is what I need, these are the limitations. You know, even I got a call from a director a while ago, and it was a real breath of fresh air, because he was like, he was like, I want to make sure that we are like compensating you for pre-production time and talking about like how many hours are expected out of that and stuff. And like, that was something that I just thought no one talked about. Like my
Yeah.
understanding was like DPs get paid for days on set and everything else you just do. It's like, that's part of why
Even
we
color,
get paid more than other
right?
people. Yeah. Whether it's pre-pro, making decks, pulling references. And so to start meeting other people who are like, oh no, you can get paid for that. Like maybe your rates are lower or higher, but like you can still have that conversation, and practicing having that conversation is a skill that's really valuable no matter what part of your career you're in.
I agree. I think it's also, though, again, kind of difficult when a lot of people have hacked their way to where they're at, and they probably at their core kind of feel like they're in a position that they don't really deserve.
Right. Imposter
And that,
syndrome
exactly.
really F's the whole thing up.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of why it's important, I think, to have those people, like we talked about, I don't know what episode, when like you had like 5 people in different areas of your life that kind of help guide you, and to have those people that have taken the journey before you and can really, I don't know, even if it's just giving you some encouragement, like you're worth it. I know that sounds kind of corny, but to have those people in your corner that you can talk about these hard issues to and get their opinion is like super important.
Right. Totally.
When you've kind of hacked your way, I guess, or when you feel like you've hacked your way.
Well, and I think that's the thing that's like, that was part of the conversation I had with my friend earlier, because he was like, who says, no sane person says no to $2,000 for 3 days of work? And I was like, sure, if I offered you $2,000 to go shoot a wedding this weekend, would you do it? And he was like, no. And I was like, so it's not about the money, it's that you don't do that. And so I think that's the thing, is like, so often the imposter syndrome kicks in and says, you're not better than this. And it's not about if you're better than this. It's the wrong challenge, is to say that like, oh, when your ego kicks in, or the challenge to your ego, and it's like, oh, you're, you know, I think I've had all these thoughts that are like, if I say no to this, that's like a full month of work for people. That's like a trip, that's a vacation, that's this chunk of my mortgage, that's whatever else. And it's like, you can't really look at it that way. A lot of the times it's like, where do I want to go? And is this a part of my progression? Because like the other way that I look at it is like, when I get called for stuff like that, I got called for something a little while ago that was this like, they wanted to do a small commercial, sort of one-man band, director, producer, DP sort of thing. And the budget was like $7,500. And there's some part of me that can justify that and be like, the amount of time it would take me, it's enough money. But like the thing that I came down on is like, I was doing that 6 years ago. I'm not doing that again. Like, and if I ever have to, and like the house is on fire, I will. But like, just for the sake of where I want to go, like this is not progressing me, and
Sure.
That's where like, I think there's something to be said for, it's not always like a strict financial linear path, because, we've talked about like,
well, you got to be secure in your finances to do what you just did. A lot of people aren't. That's just the reality.
Right. And that's where like being stable enough to afford to say no is a big deal. But also I think that's where it's like, it's not just the money. It's the sense of like all the pieces around it, and you having the ability to say no to things that aren't a good fit and to say yes to things that are a better fit. And there's like a lot of stuff in your life that has to line up for that to play out. But I think practicing saying, no, I'm not going to do that, here's what I would need to do that, is a skill that just pays off big time.
You're not saying no in order, like going back to your initial question. You're just saying basically counter their offer with what you need, either resources, money, time, etc., to accomplish what they're asking, right?
Yeah, but that only means anything if you're willing to walk, because if they come back and they go, no, this is what we budgeted, this is what we need, it is what it is, and you say, okay, fine, then guess what happens when they come back? They're not going to listen to you at all. They're just going to be like, he's going to flare up for a second, and then he's going to give what we take him. And so that's the thing that's like, if you don't say no, your yes doesn't mean anything, is like, once you get pushed down And then if you do that repeatedly with people and you say, this is what I want, and they say, well, this is what I'll give you. And you go, okay, fine. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. There's a fine line there with like compromise. But if you're always getting beat down, those people will continually beat you down,
Right.
because that's just the pattern that you're training in them. And so you have to be willing to walk from some of these things. And I've walked from, there's production companies that I know have reputations of taking their sweet ass time to pay people, and I just refuse to work for them. And I've told them that. I'm like, I'm not, until you get your crap together, I'm not working with you. There are people who have taken advantage of friends of mine that I refuse to work for. There's people who, for whatever reason,
So,
I like.
how do you though move into that confidence? What would you recommend? Is it asking other people around you that you would say that you're on comparable level, knowing their rates, combined with like getting your financial shit in order? And then like, is it writing down your goals and where you want to be and always keeping these at the forefront of your thoughts? Like, how does one get into that? Because I think you've said a lot of good things about what you would do now, but I still don't think there's anything that's, if we're looking at this as like helping people, I don't know, but how people listening can take steps to get to the confidence, to say no, or to at least respond in situations with, I know this is what I need, and having that confidence.
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 or 3 main things. One is talk to other people and ask questions that make you uncomfortable.
And those questions are
like ask other people about rates, ask people about budgets, ask like, what did you get paid for that? My experience has been, there's some people who get really cagey, but most people are comfortable sharing, and I try to share back, but that information is always helpful. Because I think when you're in a vacuum and a client goes, that sounds like a lot of money, you go, oh shit, maybe it is a lot of money. Maybe I am crazy, maybe whatever else. And then like, I was just talking to a friend at an agency about a 3 deliverable 30-second campaign, 330s that are all predominantly licensed phone footage. Basically, it's called like user generated content, but it's like VO. And I was like, what's the budget for that? And they were like $80,000. And so that's a helpful piece of information for me, that when I go in and someone's like, we want 3 shoot days, we want a crew, we want whatever else, and you say, okay, well, that's whatever, call it 10, 20, 40, $50,000, whatever you're saying, $200,000. And they go, that sounds like a lot of money. It's like, that's cool. Then you should hire someone else to do it, instead of going, you're right, that is a lot of money, this doesn't make sense, talk myself out of it.
First, it's like gathering data.
Getting more information so that you have some metrics for that. If you don't know how to like actually make a budget or anything too, because I think that's another thing that's like starting out, if you're on the more like working with client side, we all just make numbers up, right? You're sort of like, I don't know, like you're back of the napkin math where you're like, my time at this rate and my costs, and like learn how to actually like budget for things and to be able to stand by a number. And there's like different schools of thoughts on that, but like, and if it's your rate, then like pick a rate and stick with it. And that's where the other thing I was going to say is just like, be better at generating opportunity. Because I think one thing that's true of photographers, cinematographers, production companies, ad agencies, is there's this like cobbler's kids have no shoes sort of scenario, where we all love marketing everyone else and we're all horrible at actually marketing ourselves. And so you don't get that many calls. And then when someone calls, you have to say yes because you don't have any other work. And it's like, if there's anyone that should be drowning in opportunity, it's all of us, because we have all the skill sets, but we choose not to use them. And so I think that's one thing where like, if you get that gut feeling a few times in a row that's like, oh, I didn't want to say yes to this, but I had to, I would say no to the next one, and take those 2 or 3 days you said no to and freaking go get lunch with people or do something, but like generate more opportunity for yourself so that you don't have to keep working with people who are not giving you what you want. Because there's so much opportunity and so much work out there, and you're just only exposed to a very small portion of it.
So we have gather data, generate more opportunities for yourself. And then what would be is there a third step there?
I think the third one, there's probably something else, but I think the biggest one is just freaking practice saying no. Like, just do it and you'll be fine. And that's the most shocking part, is when you say no and you turn down a job and the world doesn't end. And like you still get called again or whatever else. It's sort of like how I felt when I quit Instagram and unfollowed everyone and I was like, I'm never going to work again.
Right.
And I will tell you, I didn't feel a single dent in the amount of calls that I got. And like this guy today who was like, if I tell them this is my rate, they're never going to call me again. And I was like, I 100% guarantee you that won't happen. I bet something better will happen. And he sent the message that was like, this is my rate, sort of take it or leave it. And they said, yeah, that's fine. And like, as you start just doing that and it works, you'll do it more, but you have to just start doing it. And it's not going to work every time. Some people are going to say, no, we don't have the money. No, we can't do that, whatever. But just like practice.
What you're saying is your data,
yep,
opportunities, practice saying no.
Yep.
Be a Don, bruh. Be a Don.
Hey, my boy.
That sucked.
Where's
Quentin when you need him?
Yeah, seriously. Need more dads in our life. But
no for the sound effects.
Those are my tips there. Because I think that's the biggest thing, though, is like practicing it. Like I had a pricing thing that was like that earlier this year where I got called about a photo shoot and they wanted to do like event coverage of a photo of this thing. And I forget what the original quote was. It was like $2,000 or something for a few hours. And then they wanted to add, they emailed and were like, okay, we want to add employee portraits and product photos to the day. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And I sent them a new quote. And I really waffled on this because I was like, I could just do it. And I sent them a new estimate that was like, I forget what it came out to, but it was something like $7,500. It was basically like 3 different shoots plus lights and an assistant for the headshots and portrait photos. And they came back and they were like, oh, this seems a little steeper than we expected. And I explained it. I was like, here's why it is what it is. And I sort of stood my ground. And I was like, I'm going to just lose the whole job, whatever. And they came back and they were like, we really still want to do the event stuff. That's a priority for us. So we can do just that at the $2,000 or whatever it was. And we want to do the headshots and portrait stuff later at your allotted rate, but we're just going to wait on that. And that's another, like, it's not cash in hand at that moment, but I just saved myself. I put another like $5,000 on the table for work that I was going to do anyway, Right. And it's like whether or not I made that day easier and got the same amount of money, or whether or not, and that's where like there's a line here where you can, serve people. I'm not saying like be a pain in the butt about everything, but I'm saying that as you start to feel out these things and learn about these things, and really you should learn about these things. It's crazy. Like, getting that email back was like this odd adrenaline rush of like, you're so scared at saying no,
right?
And then standing your ground. And then when it works, it's like, holy crap, I just like got into the Matrix or something, you know?
Rocky at the top of the stairs. Yeah, I think practicing too, like I'm a little hot-headed naturally. And over the years, like just simmering down a little bit and learning, even if it's like type a really quick response, but don't send it.
Right.
And learning correct etiquette and being a respectful response, but still being firm and having the confidence in what you're bringing to the table is like, I don't know. That's a skill that I would encourage you, if you don't have, to like learn as fast as you can. 'Cause
right.
It's so helpful.
Right. And just be direct. Like, you don't have to be rude or mean or emotional. But like, even in that conversation we had with our friend, he was like, I feel like I have to say like, I totally get it if that doesn't work, or I'm sorry, whatever. And it's like, you don't have to hedge anything. Just say, this is what it is.
Right.
Period. The end. Like, you don't go into Starbucks and be like, how much is a Frappuccino? And they're like, $5. Yep. I'm so sorry. If you can't afford it, I get it. Like, it just is what it is. And in this world, it's the same thing. Like, just practice being direct. And that's another like little tip is if you're on the phone with someone and like, what's your rate? Say the number and don't say anything else.
Let them speak first.
Let it be awkwardly silent. If you're going to drop a budget on someone and you're going to say, they say, okay, what are you thinking? You say, whatever, let's say $50,000. Just wait, because they will fill the gap, and they will give you the power when they fill the gap. They might not give you what you want, but you need to let that simmer for a minute. And another little tip, which I'll credit this to Chris Doe, is I've been practicing this in the last year. Anytime you're quoting ranges, I say the high number first now. And that's a little tip that was because when you go small number and the small number is already bigger than what they're thinking, you like sticker shock them and they don't even hear the second number. So if you say like, oh, what's that going to cost? Like even let's say, what do you think you need G&E wise to get this done? If you're talking to like a DP instead of a production company and you say $20,000 to $40,000. Like they hear 20 and their ears start ringing and 40 isn't even on the map. And then they go, how do we get that down to 15? Where if you go 40 to 20, they hear 40 and they go, holy crap. And then they go 20. That doesn't sound quite so bad.
That's so smart. That is so smart.
But so anytime that we're quoting ranges now, we say the higher number first.
So
and I found that helps a lot because it anchors them in their mind. Because the other thing is the client, we were talking about a situation where production gave an end client a couple options, and clients always tend to choose middle or low options is my experience. Like you got to get a really ballsy client who goes for a high option. And Blair Enns has this awesome book called Pricing Creativity that I would 100% recommend to anyone. But he talks about price anchoring a lot. And he talks about how when you go into like a high-end like luxury clothing store and there's like a $400 black t-shirt near the front door, he goes, that t-shirt exists exclusively to make $200 t-shirts look cheap. Because the only way you can judge value is relative to something else. And so when you tell a client $20,000 to $40,000 and their reference point is $5,000, they hold up $20,000 and $5,000, and your thing seems really expensive. But when you go $100,000 to $50,000, $50,000 sounds like a deal compared to 100. So it's all controlling what people are comparing to. And I think that's another skill that's like just how you're managing that conversation and managing the comparisons that you allow people to make, because people will say, oh, well, I could get so-and-so to do it for X. Like I had a call like this a few years ago where they were like, hey, we want you and your red. That's how old this was because I still had a red. Your red, your shuttle dolly, lights, client monitor, whatever else. And we have $1,000 budgeted for everything. And I was like, okay, go pound sand. And they were like, okay, well, then how about whatever. And I was like, how about this? You pay me my rate and you go get all the gear from a local rental house and you figure it out. And they were like, oh, well, our last DP brought all that stuff for $1,000. And I was like, then hire him.
Right. So I think it's a perfect example of if you got to be continuously getting data.
Right.
Like don't just be okay with a production company doing that to you. And if you're equipped with the answers from questions you've asked people smarter than you, peers, etc., then you will go into those conversations ready for an appropriate response.
And don't feel like because someone else did it, you have to do it. Like There's always a new village idiot. And when I was, I think I touched on this before, but when I was doing music stuff, it was like, oh, well, we've got some college kid that'll do it for $500. It's like, great, then freaking hire him. I'm not him,
And why are you talking to me?
Right, exactly. And that's the thing is like there's a reason they're talking to you and you have to hold on to that. And they're going to try and convince you that it's all the same and whatever else. But, coming back to the Starbucks thing, it's like you don't go in and go, I could get a Cumberland Farms coffee for $1. It's like, then go to Cumberland Farms, dude. This isn't the same thing.
Well, it's funny, like when you go into Starbucks to buy said drink, they have based that off of data.
Right.
That cost for that drink. Their expenses and profit. So like you should have the same confidence when you're giving the response about your rate.
Right.
Apparently I don't, but
I mean,
I just I take it
for all of us.
Yeah. I just take it slower. Like, I mean, I turned down a travel job I told you about a couple weeks back and it was just like, no, sorry. I did the math and I was like, this is not even close to okay. For what I have brought to the table. So I think to answer the question I've asked twice to you, and
have I not answered a question?
No, just because I think a lot of people, like the time we live in, is there's a lot of people that have just that have gone untraditional routes into our industry, and going from starting out where you kind of need to say yes to a lot of opportunities to like being more picky, like that transition. It's kind of just weird. It's awkward the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think, if people if they can take anything away from this, it's like, I think 3 points that you touched on are perfect. The data, the continuously looking out for new opportunities and being your best cheerleader. And then just practicing saying no, I think are ways that people can kind of slowly go from being unsure about themselves to very confident in what they bring to the table.
Right. And try and find other people who you can be honest with about that stuff. Like my buddy who was like, hey, what should I say? And I got to push him a little bit and it paid off for him. I have people like that in my life that I've said, hey, I got offered this. I feel like this isn't the right number. This isn't the right deal, whatever else. What should I say? And having people who can back you up when you start to chicken out, because you will start to chicken out, is helpful. And I think there is another thing. There's this other quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's about these like two levels of success. And that like level one of success, I think Chris Do talks about this, but I don't know if it's his quote, is the idea that like you get to the top of level one by hustling as hard as possible and saying yes to everything. And then you get to the top of level one. And if you want to move through level two, you win level two by saying no to almost everything and only accepting things that have significant strategic advantage towards moving you towards your end goal. And I think that's something that's like what you're talking about is there is that first phase, right? That's like, will you do a music video? Will you do a wedding video? Will you do a video for my church? Will you take a picture of my dog? And it's like, yeah, just say yes to all that stuff. And just learn and learn and learn. I think the tricky part is what you're trying to get at is like, what's the delineation between phase 1 and 2? Because I think we're in phase 2 portions of our career now. And I think that you just have to feel that out and decide for yourself. Like, I don't know.
I think if you give those
marker,
I know if we're going to use those 3 like point steps, recommendations, whatever you want to call them,
you're dead.
Yep.
The end.
And yeah, I think when you start implementing those 3 points that you suggested, I think the transition will just present itself. And I think everyone's on a different journey. So that kind of answered, I guess, my initial question back to you is like, how does that happen? Yeah, I think everyone could do better at all those.
Yeah,
all those
totally.
different things. No, the no part is probably the hardest part for most people because it just feels very, I don't want to say mean, but I don't know. It's just very awkward sometimes to say no.
Well, and I think that's something that's like, it's just not, it's another conversation we never learn how to have, right? Because in that phase 1, you're always saying yes. And so you don't know how to say no. And so like, I got a call from a producer recently that was like, hey, are you available on the 11th to go to Las Vegas? They might listen to this, but that's okay. And I was like, let me check my calendar. And I did. I went back and checked, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I just already know that this.
The classic, let me check my calendar too. That's something I use when I know that I don't want to do something.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I do have to check my calendar, but it's definitely also a stalling technique.
Yeah.
But there was sort of this thing that's like, I don't want to do this. Like, I know that it's not going to pay super well. It's not a good experience. It's not like a project that's going to go on my reel. And so it just doesn't check any of the boxes. And it's always that question of like, how do you say that in a way that like doesn't come off as mean? And I don't think it is. I think it's just like honest, right? Like if I called Khalid tomorrow and was like, hey dude, do you want to come shoot this vlog with me? He'd be like, yeah, dude, sorry, that's not really where I'm at right now, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I should be capable of accepting that. And if the people who are hiring you can't accept that, like they've got their own problems there, you know? But like, I think that's a big thing is that some of us interact with like egomaniacs early in our career. Like I know some musicians who I've worked with who I've like said no to, and they've been like, you're crazy. And I'll just go find someone else. And it's like, dude, I've just got other stuff going on, you know?
Or your song sucks ass.
Yeah. Or I just don't want to do it. There's 2 things there that I was thinking of. I got called for this thing a while ago, and I went back to the guy, and I was like, honestly, like, I think I'm going to have to pass. You know, the rate's a little lower than what I'm looking for. Like, there isn't really the crew and gear budget that I would like to execute the concept. And I just sort of, like, can't justify it at this point. And he sort of, like, briefly turned back on it and was like, I don't want to have to like sell you on my project. Like this is whatever. And I was like, then don't. Like I've already.
No, you're like, no, I don't want to do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can try and come back and solve the problems that I have, or you can just go find someone else, and that's fine. But like, I think that's a thing that's fair to say. And like, I got a similar thing where a musician sent me a track last week and was like, hey, I want to do a song. I want to do a video for my new single. And I was like, can you send me the track? And he sent me the track. And I was like, do you have a concept? And I didn't love the track. And he was like, I don't have a concept. I want to develop something. And I was like, yeah, honestly, I'm just going to have to pass on this one. Thanks for thinking of me, though.
Right.
And I think that's something that's like, it comes back to that always hedging thing. That's like, we have to be like, oh, I'm super busy or I whatever. And it's like, I just don't want to do it. That's fine. Like, it's okay to not want to do something.
And sometimes that will make said client or other clients want you more and pursue you harder.
Totally. And that's the other funny thing is that like, there's a level of respect that comes from being able to say no. And that's something that David Baker talks a lot about. He has a really good book called The Business of Expertise, but this idea that's like experts are in high demand and can afford to say no to things. If you can't afford to say no, it is clear to the person on the other side that you're not an expert. And so that the process of saying no reinforces the perception that you are an expert who is valuable. You know, if you went to your dentist and were like, I don't really want to pay that. And he's like, oh, well, I really need the work and whatever else. It's like, we know that that's not how that works. Like those people are all drowning in opportunity and get to pick what they want and pick what they want to do. And if they're like, no, this is sort of below what I'm doing, they say no and they move on.
They're also very specific in their expertise, which is a whole nother topic.
Right. There's a whole nother expert part of that. But I think that thing is like saying no. If you were to call someone like Khalid or Max Goldman or Patrick O'Sullivan or whoever else, you wouldn't expect them to just say yes to anything.
They also wouldn't pick up. Money. They'd say, talk to my agent.
Right. But even the people who don't have agents, let's say, like, you know, those guys don't just say yes to everything. And the biggest difference there isn't, and I mean this in the best way possible, but like the difference there isn't skill set so much as it is confidence again. It's like they just are willing to say no. It's not that they're 10 times more talented than you. They just say no, which leads to better opportunities instead of being stuck in the cycle of shooting crappy stuff you don't want to with no budget and no plan. And so it's like you have to start that upward spiral, but it all comes down to you controlling the conversation.
The end.
The end. We're only 25 minutes over.